Hi everybody, we're doing the famous UBC Cinnamon Buns today. Okay, so this is another yeast bread recipe using active dry yeast. So we are going to have to activate or proof that yeast with a little bit of warm water and sugar later. But first, if you look at your step 1, it says scald milk, which actually means just to heat up the milk a little bit. Milk burns very easily, so we want to be careful with that. So put your milk into your pan, and we're going to put that onto medium heat. Okay, so medium, not too high heat, and what you're looking for is for steam to start rising from that milk. Once you see a little bit of steam, you're done. Okay, so we're going to scald the milk, so get it warmed up. So I'm just going to increase my heat a little bit in this one. Okay, and you can stir it a little bit just so that the bottom doesn't burn. Okay. Once this gets up to heat, you will see steam rising from it, and at that point you can put your margarine, your sugar, and your salt in. And then you're just going to stir it up and then cool it. Okay, the margarine does not have to be completely melted. It will continue to melt with the remaining heat of the milk. Of course, if you're at home, you can use butter, okay, or margarine. Either one works fine. Okay, so you see how there's a little bit of steam coming from that pot. You can see my husband in the background there. Okay. So once there's a little bit of steam coming out of the pot, you can. So now we can put the butter in. Now that this milk is steaming, we have scalded the milk, and like I said, just stir that butter up or margarine and let that melt a bit. Okay, it doesn't have to be completely melted, but kind of break it up into little chunks so it gets softened and melted as much as possible. Okay, and then we're also going to put our sugar and salt. Now notice there's 2 amounts of sugar in this recipe. And the first amount, this amount is to make your dough sweet. The salt is to control the action of the yeast so it doesn't overproduce gases for us. Okay, so to control the action of the yeast a little bit. The sugar in this part is just to sweeten the dough. So this bread dough is a sweetened bread dough. Okay, so this mixture, just stir it up a little bit and allow it to cool now. Like I said, don't be too concerned if all those little chunks of margarine are not melted, okay, or butter. Okay. Right now we just want to cool this mixture down. So I've turned the element off, and now we're going to go over and dissolve our yeast mixture. Okay, so the next step, on step 2, we're going to dissolve 5 ml of sugar in the warm water, sprinkle the yeast over the mixture, and be sure that the yeast is moistened. So here's the warm water, 110 degrees, okay, and we're going to dissolve our sugar first. This amount of sugar now, your second amount of sugar, is the food for the yeast, remember. Okay. So we'll dissolve that in first. Okay, so how you can tell it's dissolved is that there are no more crystals showing up on your spoon. And then you're going to sprinkle your yeast in. We don't want to just dump it all in because you want the yeast to all get moistened. Okay, so you don't want huge lumps like that one right there, so just break that up and just make sure you stir that in. Okay, so and check that there's not clumps of yeast stuck to the edge of your container, because that's not going to get to the food and water. So just give it a little stir, scraping down the sides, and then we're going to leave that for 10 minutes. Remember, for it to get activated, to wake up that yeast. Okay. Okay, so we're back. It's been about 10 minutes, and you can see how nice and frothy the yeast has become. Okay, it has activated that yeast. It is growing. It is producing carbon dioxide and alcohol, which is awesome. So now in step 3, in a large bowl, I'm combining the lukewarm milk mixture, and I'm going to add the egg to that. And with this recipe, we can use an electric mixer. It will cut down on the kneading that you have to do. So we can use the electric mixer, and this will help reduce the amount of time that you have to knead the dough. So we'll blend that together. And then in step 4, you're going to stir in your dissolved yeast. Okay, don't forget to use your best friend, remember, your rubber spatula to get all that yeast out that's stuck to the container. Okay, so get that all out. And get it off the spoon even, because some of it could be stuck to the spoon. All right. So we'll mix that together. And now we're on step number 5. We can add 500 to 600 mils of the flour, but do not add it all with the mixer. Okay, so you can be general here. I'm going to add 1 scoop at a time. And start on low. And get that mixed in. Once that is mixed in, you can add another scoop. That's your second amount. That's about 500. Maybe not quite. I think I'll add just a little half scoop here to make it about 600. Now at this point you mix it a little bit, and you're going to mix it for about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, this process is developing the gluten that you would be doing if you were to knead the dough for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I started on low, and you can go higher now and go on high speed now. So you're beating the dough for 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so this again is taking place of kneading the dough for 10 minutes. So this is another method of making dough so that you don't have to get so tired with your arms if you want to knead it. But be careful, okay? Be careful not to add all the flour. You have to only do half the amount of flour when you're using this electric mixer. Otherwise the dough gets too thick and it starts to rise up the beaters and get stuck up into the mechanism. Okay, so since I've stopped, I'm going to take a second to scrape the sides to make sure all this flour is getting into our dough. Okay, and then we're going to continue for at least 5 minutes. We want to develop that gluten now. Okay, so all the way up on high, let's beat for 5 to 10 minutes. Take a look here. You want the dough to be smooth. And look, there's lots of bubbles happening already, which is great. And it feels like it's almost elasticy. So remember, with quick breads, we did not want this. We did not want the batter to be smooth. Well, yeast breads, we want it to be smooth. So I'll give it one last little go. And we will stop there. Now at this point, you are getting rid of the mixer. No more mixer. Okay? So tap that out so get as much dough off as you can. No more mixer. We are now going to use the wooden spoon to add the rest of the flour. Okay, so now we are on step number 6. Using the wooden spoon, gradually add enough flour, of the remaining flour, to make a soft dough. Okay, so we'll add that in and just stir that now. Okay. You'll see that if you use the mixer, it would have been way too thick for that mixer to handle, and the dough would have started rising up the beaters. Okay? So just get that incorporated with the wooden spoon until a nice soft dough forms. And you are going to have to knead this, but definitely not as much as you would have if you did not use the mixer. So if you don't have a mixer at home, not a big deal. You're going to do it with the wooden spoon. And you will probably have to knead more than we would if you did have a mixer. So you'll see this is starting to become a nice soft dough, a ragged dough this would be called. Okay, so we need to add a little bit more flour to get it all together. Okay. Now you may not have to add it all. If it's already looking like it's dry, then and that you can pull it away from the bowl without any stickiness, then do not add the rest of the flour. Okay, so I'm going to give that a little test here. Okay, it looks like it's coming apart from the spoon at least. So that's a good sign. I'll get my fingers in there and see if it's too sticky. Okay, and I'm going to gather some of that dough off the side of the bowl. And that looks like it's pretty good. I can feel it soft. It's a little bit sticky still, but I can still add a little bit as I go with my hands even. Okay, so I can gather that up. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to have a lightly floured surface here. Take some of that extra flour that I didn't use in the dough and slide that dough on. Now you see how there's still bits in the bowl? So we want to make sure we get all that dough off. So take a little piece of your dough and use that to rub off any scraps of dough that might still be stuck to the bowl. Okay? And if it's coming off well, then that means you've had enough flour in there. Okay? If it's all dry and crumbly, might be a little bit too much flour. Okay? If it's wet still and really sticky, maybe you need a little more flour. So sprinkle a little more flour in your bowl and rub it off. Okay, so now we're ready to do some kneading. Okay, so now I'm on step number 7. Place the dough on a lightly floured surface, and we're going to knead until smooth and elastic. So remember, push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. And if it's sticking to your hand, add a little flour to your hand. Okay. Fold, turn, and if it's sticking to the counter, don't forget to add a little more flour there. Fold, turn, push, fold, turn. Okay. So, you know, you may not have to knead 10 minutes, but you will still need to knead until the dough is smooth and elastic. So you'll see it's still looking ragged at first. Okay, once we get going, and if it's still sticky, notice I'm taking that extra flour and sprinkling it on as I go. Okay, pretty soon now. You see these things stuck to my fingers, all this little bit, so just rub that off. Okay, I'm going to take a few minutes here, or just a few seconds really. Take some flour, rub it off with my fingertips. All those little bits can go right into the middle of your dough and get folded right in. Okay, push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. And I'm going to knead for a little bit. So you see how it's starting to get smooth, but still bumpy, still a bit sticky. Okay, I want it smoother than that. Okay, so again, I'm going to add a little bit more flour and keep kneading. Okay, probably about 5 minutes. So it's been about 5 minutes of kneading, and as you can see, the dough has become a lot smoother and a lot more elastic. So what you want is a nice, and as you can see, I've also used up all the flour. Okay, so I can put the last little bit on the counter here, do my final knead, and it should make that look nice and smooth. Okay, so you see, nice and smooth dough. When you stretch under the surface, you see some tiny little blisters popping there. Can you see those little holes underneath there? Tiny little blisters. Okay, so this is going to sit and rise overnight. If you're doing it at home, you could let it sit in a warm spot in an oiled bowl for 1 hour until this dough has gotten double the size. Okay, so if you're going to do the bowl method, choose the large bowl, put a little bit of oil in, okay, sprinkle a little oil in, and use this dough. Rub that oil around the bowl with the dough and then turn it upside down so that there is definitely oil on the top of the bowl. You can cover this with plastic wrap and then let it sit either in your fridge overnight or let it sit in a warm place for an hour and then continue with day 2 on your recipe. In class, we would normally have put it into an oiled Ziploc bag, and that would be sealed with no air left in there, and we would put that in the fridge